I'd like to call to order this regular council meeting of the town of Saugeen Shores. And the first order of business is a declaration of pecuniary interest. And I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so, and you can do so now or when it arises on the agenda. The next item is additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda, and we have nothing under that. So item 4 is adoption of minutes, and I've got a motion that's moved by Vice Deputy Mayor Huber, seconded by Councillor Madison. The council adopts the minutes of the regular council meeting of February the 13th, 2017 as presented. Any errors or omissions? Comments? All in favor? Carried. The next item is Committee of the Whole minutes of February the 13th. It's been moved by Councillor Rich, seconded by Deputy Mayor Charbonneau that the council note and file the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of February the 13th, 2017 as presented. Comments, errors, omissions? All in favor? That's carried. The next item is there's a staff report. It has to do with the Chantry Island washrooms, and it's been moved by Councillor Madison, seconded by Councillor Rich. The council authorized that Allen Hastings Limited be awarded the contract for the Chantry View washrooms in the amount of $74,994 plus HST. Questions or comments to the motion, or Vice Deputy Mayor Huber?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a good thing that it's early in the year and going to get done ahead of the season. My question, though, is what kinds of guarantees do we have associated with the timelines given for the work? The report that we received suggests that, of course, if we approve this tonight, the contractor would be notified, contract signed, so they could potentially start the work at the beginning of March and completed prior to the end of April. I just noticed that this contractor is the same contractor who received the contract for the work on the Southampton Town Hall steps, and the response we had back then was 6 weeks was sort of the anticipated time. Some things happen along the way, and of course that project still isn't finished completely. So is there any opportunity within the language of contracts that gives us the ability to encourage contracts to be done according to the timeline that's presented at the beginning of the process? How does that work?
Yes, certainly.
Sorry, go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, staff has been reviewing that, and once approved this evening, we're finalizing the contract for Allen Hastings Limited and proceeding with a clause that identifies that it must be completed by the end of April, and we're negotiating what that looks like if it proceeds beyond that.
Okay, any further questions? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Next item on the agenda, and there's a staff report with it, and it has to do with the public works tractor acquisition. And it's been moved by Councillor Grace, seconded by Councillor Minaj, that council authorize the single source purchase of a used 2013 John Deere 6125R tractor from Premium Equipment for the quoted amount of $109,000 plus applicable taxes. Any questions or comments? Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Thank you, Ms. Roche, for bringing this report forward and making that selection. Certainly the John Deere 6130 is a most excellent tractor, and I see that it is going to be replacing two tractors that we currently operate, the Ford tractors, and I like them too. I've looked at what this tractor is capable of doing, and certainly at 140 horsepower, it's capable of doing most things, particularly in the agricultural world. We're going to be using it in a municipal world, and that the front mount capability is also an excellent idea. But are we really going to be able to cover the same amount of territory with one tractor as we did with two? And in particular, I'm thinking about in the township, the cutting of the weeds in the ditch. Some of the smaller tractors are particularly well suited, and would it be not advisable to perhaps hold on to one of the smaller tractors, if not both, for that particular purpose? Because a big tractor is not well suited to doing that kind of work, nor is it fuel efficient to do. It's very hard on a big tractor to run at that speed and run a piece of equipment like that. So it's just out there. And if we were going to sell both Fords, I've often had it asked of me, would it be possible for them to go to local local tender, I guess, for purchase, as many people would certainly like to get some of our well-maintained equipment available to them.
Go ahead. I think we have a policy about sale or disposition of capital assets, so I'm sure they will follow that policy. If you want to speak to the other one, Amanda, please go ahead.
I don't know, honestly, the small tractor versus the large tractor, but the idea brought forward was that this would replace both of the tractors that it could. We didn't need to have two separate and two different shops, that we could bring the large tractor back and forth and still cover the same amount of ground. It also has the ability to groom the beach, which was, I think, what Works like to have. That's why we were looking at the bigger one.
Okay, all I'm saying is maybe let's hold on to one until we figure that out. Thanks.
Okay. Call the question. All in favor of the motion? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So the next item is motions and notice of motions, and the first one is a motion tonight, and it's a motion to support for proposed DGR, and I'll read the motion. It's been moved by Councillor Dave Mayette, seconded by Councillor Minaj, that the Mayor of the Town of Saugeen Shores be directed to send a letter to the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency expressing Council's support for the proposed Deep Geological Repository project for low and intermediate level radioactive waste in Kincardine, Ontario. Comments, questions? Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, this motion has been quite a bit of topic of discussion, not only tonight, but last year and the year before that, and it's a passionate issue with many people, and that we don't bring this to council lightly. There was a longer version of this motion that was tabled a couple of weeks ago as the notice of motion, and you will notice that it has been significantly cut down to just the action statement, which is to have the mayor draft a letter on behalf of council stating our support. I won't tonight try and make case to convince those who are in opposition to the DGR to change their mind, because I know that is a fruitless task, and that they are entrenched in their positions, the same as I'm fairly convinced of my position on it as well, having spent a considerable number of years, 18 years in particular, at the Bruce site, working in the nuclear industry, most recently as a operations specialist in the area of fuel handling, where the people that I supervised were responsible for generating low, intermediate, and high-level radioactive waste, including new fuel and spent fuel, and dealing with it in a safe and appropriate manner. So I'm not going to say that I'm an expert, but I will say that I am accustomed to and comfortable with the methods that are used. And I'm certain, having spent some time at OPG and certainly on a number of occasions toured the OPG waste facility, am fairly confident that the manner in which it is stored today, unless there's new information about some recent leak that we don't know about, the manner in which it is stored today is certainly adequate, albeit very interim, and it was never designed to outlive the half-lives or full lives of the nuclear materials that are stored therein. So I would just like to maybe state three things that I consider to be the undeniable truth with regards to spent fuel and spent waste and intermediate. Well, let's specifically talk about low and intermediate waste, because that's what the DGR proposal that we're talking about is referring to. And so the idea that we do not want a nuclear waste repository, and I appreciate that people call it a repository and not use the D word, because that just degrades the level of scrutiny that needs to be applied to it. But to suggest that we do not want one of these repositories on the shores of Lake Huron, I maybe alluded to it earlier, but I believe that those people are approximately 40 to 50 years too late, because that repository exists today and is stored in above ground and slightly below ground repositories, and certainly it is in its current state, albeit safe, significantly more exposed to the elements than it would be in what is being proposed for the Deep Geological Repository in the impermeable rock. The second, what I call the truths, are that there does not exist And OPG's submission on the alternative site suggested that there are certainly other places you could put it, but there does not exist a site that is going to be a willing host community for this waste. There are no areas in the province of Ontario or all of Canada that are uninhabited, and if putting this waste in somebody else's backyard or in their territory, Indigenous or otherwise, is in any way suggested that their lifestyle and their safety is somewhat less important than the people that live in this area, then that is one person too many. So I would suggest that moving it to another location and expecting somebody else and some other municipality to embrace the waste generated by the prosperity that we've enjoyed is irresponsible. And the third undeniable, I believe, is that the most dangerous time when you're dealing with waste, and certainly through my experience and what has been suggested, the most dangerous time, and it's not that it can't be handled safely, but the most dangerous period is when you're transporting it and moving it from one location to another and moving it from one packaging container to another. Those are the times when when human intervention takes place, and those are the times when accidents are most prone to happening. Keeping it in its location and as close to the permanent location as possible, which is certainly one of the significant advantages of having the DGR on the Bruce site, that exists. So those three undeniable truths exist, and I don't think even the strongest proponent can argue successfully that those three are insignificant. So I would urge that Council support this. The previous version of the motion did state that we believe, and I firmly do believe, that the majority of citizens of Saugeen Shores would support this. This is done not through any kind of a poll. We don't conduct business of this municipality, as far as I've been involved in what's the word for a poll? A plebiscite or for a referendum. We don't conduct our business that way. But certainly in my experience talking with a lot of people, and my wife and children will tell you that I happen to talk to a lot of people, I find very, very few who are in opposition, and absolutely zero are in opposition of people who have gotten experience with nuclear waste. Certainly anybody who has worked at the Bruce site has, through osmosis or experience or training, become familiar with and understands the difference between neutron, gamma, beta, alpha, and how those different types of energies infect the biological person, and how those different types of elements behave when they become exposed to the environment, be it airborne or waterborne or rockborne, and they understand what shielding means, and those people are all perfectly comfortable with what it is, and they understand the science. And most other people are either supportive, including my good friend who is the former president of the Bruce County Federation of Agriculture, whose association supports the nuclear industry, including the DGR. And most other people are either for it or relatively indifferent. They're saying the nuclear has been here for a long time, and it's going to be here for a long time. We're used to it. We're comfortable with it. We're confident that the organizations, be it Bruce Power or the OPG, are well trained and competent in handling this waste, as they have been for the past going on 50 years. And it was alluded to earlier by Council Minaj, I believe, who said that we all own a piece of this. We've all enjoyed the economic spin-off. We've enjoyed emissions-free, clean electricity at a reasonable price, and sometime we have to deal with this. To suggest that a complete detailed to the level that has been conducted at the Bruce site should be conducted on alternate sites around the location is simply suggesting that we do nothing with it for at least the next 20 to 30 years, because that's the amount of time that it's going to take to select, to gain support, to build, to package, transport, and move the stuff off the site where it is now. So I look at around the room at the people who are against it, myself included, and we're saying if that's what we're saying, and I'm not saying that, but if that is what we're saying, that we should find something else to do with it, then what we're saying is let's let the future generations deal with our waste. And that simply is not something that I'm willing to do. We generated it. Certainly the future is going to generate more because nuclear energy is not going anywhere in Ontario unless we come up with a significant alternative clean source, which I don't see happening in the short term. I say we turn ourselves to the expert advice that we've received in the JRP and subsequent findings, expert advice that we've heard here tonight from people who are experts, engineers in the field, and that we get ourselves behind this technology and send our support to the minister. Not to say that our support is going to be the deciding factor for one way or the other, but certainly by not sending support would send a stronger message than that maybe we're not for it. So I would say, let's get on with business. Let's get this passed, and I urge you to support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mayette. Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'll be a little shorter, actually, but believe it or not. It's no secret. I've lived here since high school days and got a job at the BMPD, and I've worked there over 40 years. Raised a family and now have grandchildren that come back here. I've been involved in many of the deepest, darkest secrets, if you want, of the Bruce Power or the BNPD's operation of their nuclear reactors. And I'm a teacher, contract teacher who teaches nuclear safety. And I believe it's my responsibility to support a solution, not to keep saying no, not to keep saying it should be somewhere else, we shouldn't deal with it here. And you've heard Dave speak to that as well. We have the facility, we have the security guards, Canada's second largest army, I think. And we have, against malevolent acts of terrorism that could surface, we have the ability to deal with it on site. As I mentioned to John, and I've mentioned before, and I've mentioned to Cheryl as well, do I believe everything that OPG is doing with this proposal is the best of the best? I don't think so. I think that there's been some mistakes made along the way, and I think that one DGR, in my opinion, for all of this waste, in particular the spent fuel waste, should be our predominant need to find that solution and do it quickly. With the climate change as we know it and the way the world is going, we don't know what's coming next. Goderich tornado was a perfect example, and it has changed the way that Bruce Power is now operating its nuclear stations. Between the Fukushima Act and the Goderich Tornado Act, they have upped their safety programs. Really, to finish, I believe in the scientific community that put together the information, and I believed in the JRP process. I was a speaker in favor of the DGR at the JRP. And finally, for those who don't believe I have social license, I did all that before I put my name on a ballot to be elected in the Port Elgin ward, which is arguably 50% of the population of this community. And those people put their X in my box and elected me here, knowing I was in full favor of a DGR. So I will be in support of this option to build this DGR on this BMPD site as at least a starting point, and I want it to happen sooner than later. I don't want all that waste to sit there in its current form. It would be much safer in the ground. Thank you.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In February 2016, Minister McKenna made 3 specific requests to OPG for additional information. 1, for specific alternate locations other than Kincardine. 2, an analysis of the cumulative effects of the project on the environment, since 3 nearby municipalities could still host a proposed DGR for used radioactive fuel. And 3, an updated list of OPG's commitments to reduce each identified adverse effect of the DGR. OPG's report, which totals approximately 650 pages, was released to the public on January 3rd of this year. On January 18th, the CEAA invited public review and comment on OPG's additional information. The motion before us tonight asks that the Mayor be directed to send a letter to SEA expressing council support for the proposed Kincardine DGR. So what's the letter to say, and who determines the details of this letter? Will the letter say that all of council has reviewed the entirety of OPG's report? I've only read 445 pages of the report, and that took a long time. If you vote yes on this motion, that means you've read the whole report and you have no concerns or questions. Will the letter say council approves of the content of OPG's report? Let's start with the minister's request for specific reference to actual locations. OPG ignored that request and instead mapped out large areas of southern and northern Ontario, with the borders of these areas designated by lists of GPS coordinates. A January 10, 2017 Toronto Star article mocked some of OPG's GPS coordinate locations: a stately home in Toronto near Yonge and Davisville, Ryden's gas station in Minnesota. Some of the other locations were a condominium in Collingwood and a property across the road from an organic winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake. But what's really important here is that 2 of the GPS coordinates were in the U.S. state of Minnesota, and 1 was in Quebec. These are clear legal errors, as an OPG repository would not be able to be built outside of Ontario. These errors were contained in not 1, but 2 separate subreports, prepared, reviewed, and approved by 4 OPG employees, including Jerry Keto, OPG's VP of Decommissioning. The errors were corrected on January 13th, 3 days after the release of the Toronto Star article. One would think getting it right would be important to OPG for a report where the stakes are so high. Double-checking these coordinates didn't take specialized technical expertise, because I did it. But OPG's inclusion of this incorrect information was sloppy, is troubling, and calls into question OPG's assurances that this project will be safe. And why didn't OPG provide specific locations as requested by the minister? At our June 27, 2016 COW meeting, Jerry Keto told us they couldn't identify a specific alternate location because, quote, "It would be hazardous to say a community's name and say we're considering you for a DGR. It would probably cause a lot of anxiety and a lot of problems," end quote. The report discusses a survey performed by a public opinion research company on behalf of OPG in 2016. According to the report, the survey of 805 people found that 70% of respondents supported the project after, quote, "all of the information was given," end quote. How was all the information given? The survey provided critiques of the proposed DGR project at the Bruce nuclear site, as well as corresponding rebuttals. One of the critiques was, quote, "other DGRs have failed in other countries, so the science cannot be trusted," end quote. The rebuttal presented was, quote, "DGRs have safely stored waste around the world, including US, Sweden, Germany, Finland, and Korea." So let's look at how misleading that rebuttal really is. First, a deep geological repository is a repository greater than 300 meters below the Earth's surface. Above that, the repository is called near surface, not deep. In the rebuttal, all nuclear waste repositories are described as DGRs, even if some of them are actually near surface. Why is that important? Because it allowed OPG to include nations that don't have operating DGRs, like Sweden, Finland, and South Korea. Second, was nuclear waste stored safely in the nations listed? The U.S. 3 years ago, an explosion at the WIPP DGR in New Mexico contaminated 35% of the underground area. Because of this incident, a subsequent federal investigation found more than 24 safety lapses at the dump. WIPP's filtration system was supposed to prevent any radioactive releases, but it malfunctioned, and 21 workers on the surface received low doses of radiation. There were no workers underground. WIPP was reopened on a limited basis in January of this year, but full operations cannot resume until 2021, when a new ventilation system is completed. The direct cost of the cleanup is now $640 million, with even higher costs projected as repairs continue. The Yucca Mountain high-level DGR project was halted in 2010. In Germany, DGRs at Assay and Morsleben were constructed at depths of up to 950 meters. They've been closed because of collapse and leakage, and their cleanup will cost billions of euros. Gorleben, an experimental DGR whose future is being debated by the German government, has never operated as a functioning DGR, and a fourth site, Conrad, is now being considered for a DGR but is not in operation. Sweden and Finland's low and intermediate level waste repositories are near surface, ranging in depth from 50 to 110 meters. These repositories have not had accidents so far, but they're not DGRs. Sweden's high-level DGR project has been halted because of concerns, including their containment system, and Finland's DGR is not operating yet. South Korea's Gyeongju facility, which recently opened in July 2015, is also near surface at a depth of 130 meters. A high-level DGR in South Korea is planned, but its operation is years away. This rebuttal statement was used to sway survey respondents to support, but it omitted important facts and was designed to mislead. Now we come to the cumulative effects of having a used fuel DGR in the same region as the Kincardine DGR. One of OPG's main arguments is to defend the Kincardine site is how expensive and risky transportation to an alternate site would be. OPG reports that in an average year, it transports 800 shipments of radioactive material over a distance of 500,000 kilometers. This report anticipates that a DGR in Kincardine would operate until 2066, with a used fuel DGR operating until 2083, and that their operations then would overlap for 24 years. OPG contends that because Huron-Kinloss, South Bruce, and Central Huron are more than 20 kilometers away from the Bruce nuclear site, adverse cumulative effects from the used fuel DGR would be unlikely. But if the used fuel DGR is located in South Bruce, for instance, isn't it possible that shipments of used fuel from points east, Darlington, Pickering, Gentilly, and Point Lepreau, and low and intermediate level waste from Darlington and Pickering could be traveling the same roads, increasing the risk of accident, radioactive release, noise, and air pollution that OPG argues should be deterrents to an alternate location at a greater distance? OPG's report is silent on this possibility. With great respect and affection for all of my council colleagues, we must acknowledge that we represent a community which is deeply divided on this issue. Without a secret ballot referendum based on an unbiased question, we cannot confidently state how the majority of our residents stand on this issue. The argument that we have a duty to host nuclear waste in our region because our community has benefited economically has been used worldwide to persuade nuclear communities to host nuclear waste repositories. When that repository is located beside a Great Lake, which provides clean water for millions in 2 countries, that argument pales in comparison to our duty to protect our precious natural resource. Finally, the mistakes and omissions in this report, written not by an independent third party, but by the project proponent and its hirees, demonstrate a troubling lack of rigor that challenges the long-term safety of this project.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just make a brief comment. I listened to my colleagues across the way, and certainly none of the ones who have spoken so far are prone to presenting alternative facts. So I trust everything that's been said, and that's the point I wanted to highlight is that I've been listening to presentations on the low and intermediate level deep geological repository for more than a decade now. I attended the ICGR conference in 2013, as was pointed out earlier. I've gone to the site and toured all that. I've heard a lot of information, seen a lot of information presented, and also seen the information presented by the SOS group and other groups who are opposed to it, and listened carefully to it. And sometimes you get accused in this job of not listening to people when you make a decision, which isn't exactly what happens. You listen and then you decide. You make a decision based on what you've heard, and that's going to be the opposite of what half the people want generally. But I do listen a lot to all these things, and I know everybody does. And for me, listening to you have to make a call, and I think we do have to make a call here because I think it's important for our community and for this council representing the community to make a statement on what its views are with regard to a major project of this nature in our region, in our broader community. So I think we do have to make a call. And for me, in making this call, I have to go and listen to that expert opinion that I've heard over and over again at places like the ICGR conference that tell me consistently, and to the point where I feel like it's a scientific consensus, that the best, safest way to treat both used nuclear fuel and low and intermediate level waste is in passive isolation below ground in a deep geological repository. That's report after report. Even when Obama canceled the Yucca Mountain project, commissioned the Blue Ribbon Panel, the Blue Ribbon Panel came back and said you need to adopt adaptive phase management. You need to put this waste in passive isolation below ground. Over and over again, that is what we hear from experts around the world. And I have to, I'm just a fruit farmer, and I who can read, but and that's the best and strongest tool I have to understand these things. I have to accept that conclusion because I think it's grounded in the science as best I can understand it. So I will support the resolution and support the mayor sending an indication of our support for this deep geological repository for low and intermediate level waste. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks. If there's no other comments, I will have a very brief comment. For much has been said. I think it's no secret that I've been involved in one way or another for about 14 years, I believe, when this project started, and have followed it very closely. Know the questions that it's raised in our community, but I supported the process and I support the findings, and will vote for it. But and I don't suspect anything that was. I know this has been mentioned. I don't suspect anything I say here tonight is going to change anybody's mind. I'm not that good of a debater or speaker, to tell you the truth. But there was Councillor Mayette raised it, and there was an issue raised at one of the delegations that stated that the current site is leaking dangerously, and perhaps there's people in harm's way. And I know, to my knowledge, I know that not to be true. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission monitors that site very clearly. Those reports are available publicly at the CNSC that will tell you that that is not happening, that the site is not leaking, that it is being run very, very efficiently, and that no one is in harm's way currently. And I just wanted to point that out because that is a matter of public record. So, I mean, we've had lots of speeches on this tonight, and I think it's time really to call the question and move on this particular issue. I appreciate everyone's participation and comments, but I have read the motion, and I don't. If committee wants, I'll read it again, but if not, I will call the question. Anybody want it read again? If not, then all in favor. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. So, there are 3 notices of motions, and they will be on the agenda for the next council meeting. They're about uniform acoustic testing, Highway 21 rail crossing, and Ferry Lake. So the next item on the agenda is bylaws, and I will move, and it's been moved by Councillor Minaj, seconded by Vice Deputy Huber, that bylaw 15-2017 being a bylaw to authorize the entering into of a lease agreement with Her Majesty the Queen as represented by the Ministry of Fisheries and Ocean for the leasing of Chantry Island is hereby read a first, second, and third time and finally passed and sealed this 27th day of February 2017. Questions, comments? Councillor Mayette.
Long live the Queen.
All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. The next item then is a bylaw to authorize a sublease agreement with the Marine Heritage for Chantry Island, and it's been moved by Councillor Mazin, seconded by Councillor Rich, that bylaw 16-2017, being a bylaw to enter into a sublease agreement with the Marine Heritage Society, is hereby read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed and sealed this 27th day of February 2017. Any questions or comments to the motion or bylaw? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. The next one then is a bylaw to appoint a Director of Finance, and it's been moved by Deputy Mayor Charbonneau, seconded by Councillor Rich, that bylaw 17-2017, being a bylaw to appoint a Director of Finance for the Corporation of the Town of Saugeen Shores, is hereby read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed and sealed this 27th day of February 2017. Comments to the motion or bylaw? All in favor? That's carried. And it's been moved by Councillor Minaj, seconded by Vice Deputy Mayor Huber, that bylaw 18-2017, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores, is hereby read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed and sealed this 27th day of February 2017. Jumping ahead. All in favor? That's carried. Been moved by Councillor Mayette and seconded by Councillor Grace that this regular council meeting of February 27, 2017 hereby adjourn at 9:42. All in favor? We're adjourned.